No, he will always be a hoss.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, by definition, he
He is.
he will.
He is the only other person out there aside from Jesus or God that can say, "I am." So right, I am. You know?
Look, all I'm saying is you don't hassle a hoss,
Yep.
okay?
I know.
That's all I know. Oh, man. And with that, hmm, we should record. So, okay, how to adapt a story. Are we getting into Rings of Power stuff here at all,
I
or
would just kinda
no?
barely touch on it. I was thinking that next week, we actually do a hardcore this is kind of the setup for it. Kinda
Okay,
say, "Hey, here's our views on adapting stuff," whether it's for
yeah,
marketing, for, like, a
sure.
strategy thing, adopting ideas. Obviously, I'm kinda focusing on the fictional side of stuff. But, and then I
Yeah.
figured next week, we could actually look at Rings of Power.
Well, like maybe we could contextualize that, like this topic came up because of how much controversy is going on right now
Perfect.
around. Does that
Awesome.
make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
awesome. No, that's a good idea. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Alright.
Okay.
I'm like the, what's the Judge Binks race? What are they called? The
The pod things? The pod racer?
from
Pod,
Star Wars.
is
Shut
that what
up.
it is? Is it a pod racer?
Oh,
Yeah.
what race is he is? What race is he?
Oh, what race he is.
The Naboo. The Naboo.
The
That's the
now
island. Gungan. The Gungans.
the gun game. Oh, man. I gotta get I gotta get more into the Star Wars stuff. They're putting some good stuff out from what I understand. Andy's really into it. I feel like I
Yeah,
gotta get more into it,
yeah,
but
super into it. Yeah, I feel like we do too, just to kind of
keep up.
yeah. I think there's
Yeah.
just there's so much stuff out there. And anytime anytime there's something like this, there's 50 new MCU movies and shows. And I'm just like, I'm not doing it. I'm like, I can't.
Dude, I know. It's a lot. It's a lot. I really do think you need to watch Moon Knight.
I do need to watch that. I need to watch that one.
You will like it. You will like that one. I'm almost positive you will.
Did you
The
see that
content is good.
thing I sent to our group about if MCU writers made Lord of the
I
Rings?
watched it.
That was pretty
Uh-huh.
funny, I thought.
I thought it was good. Yeah,
It
I
was
thought that
pretty
was
good.
cute.
All right, anyway, here we go. All right.
Cool. Well, welcome into another episode of the Story World podcast. This is, I believe, episode number 36. We're talking about how to adapt a story. And really, where this comes from is at the time of this recording, there is just a flurry of controversy, as we knew there would be, around this new series called The Rings of Power by Amazon, which we've talked about on the show briefly before. And we're going to talk about a lot more in an upcoming episode, hint, hint. But it kind of brings up the question: how do you adapt a story? How, is it possible to take an ancient, call it, it's not really ancient, but an older work of fiction, or anything really, and adapt it for a modern audience? How might you go about that, and how do you do it well? So that's it. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that introduces the subject, perfectly fine. I think a lot of times, especially when people, say if they like a public figure, let's just say Abe Lincoln, and then they watch the Abe Lincoln biopic, what you tend to see is a lot of your huge Abe Lincoln fans who reads, I don't know, journal entries that he made or all this kind of stuff will look at the movie and say, "Oh, that's wrong. I don't really like how they did that." Kind of like the snobby people, and I'm one of them where, "Oh, you should read the book. It's a lot better than the movie." Kind of like that. Um,
Yeah,
and then you have people who just don't care, and then people who want to see different stuff. And so I think there's really no clear cut way of how you should adapt something. There are just ways that you can adapt something. Does that make sense? At least in my
yeah,
mind. Okay.
sure. I think so. Yeah,
S- So we're gonna kind of go down this road here. I think we might have a few rabbit trails, but of course, I'm kind of looking at it. I made these notes really quickly. I just kind of thought that there's mostly three veins looking at it from, it could even be a non-fictional side too, but just because my mind is geared towards fiction of how to adapt the story. I'll just kind of summarize those for you right now. The first one is true to form. Um, I'm thinking of Dune and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, for the most part, where if you watch any of those movies and then you read the books, yeah, there's still going to be some changes as there pretty much always is in any adaptation. But for the most part, they've really hit the essence, the specifics, whatever lore is put in there, and whatever the writer, original creator wanted to put forth to the reader or whoever, values their work, can get from it. So that's kind of the true to form. Second, you have I guess this isn't really true because fan fiction could anything, but I hit fan fiction, just because in my mind, I think of fan fiction as you're gonna have some pretty cool callbacks, to maybe something that was in the original work of art, and fans are gonna be like, "Oh, yeah, that's cool that they brought that in there." But then you're gonna have a fan who just writes their own characters and might change some type of how a magic spell works that's not really canon. And that's kind of how I think of fan fiction as. Um, and then, loosely based, and we probably won't even talk about that much. Think about how many times you've seen a movie that says based on a true story, and you look it up and you go, "Oh wow, this was a true story," and turns out it really wasn't a true story. It's just an idea that the director got from a story he heard on the news or something. So anyway,
Right, right.
that's kind of how my mind kind of works, thinking about that.
So, just one question I have there, kind of on that overview, is does historical fiction come into play here at all, or is that something entirely different? Would you say?
I think it follows, yeah, right in suit. Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah,
It's kind of funny too because with historical fiction, I mean, that's kind of adapting history anyway. It's almost like it's
yeah.
acceptable to do that, go crazy with it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like so for example, there's a writer that I really like in the biblical world. His name is Tim Chafee. And one of the things that he did is so he's done a lot of work, study, especially from the theological and historical angle on the biblical account of the flood, Noah's Ark and all of that. Um and he's written a series of historical fictions on the life of Noah. And of course, these are fictional stories that you couldn't get from anywhere, but they use the best knowledge that we have about the real person of
Yeah.
history named Noah to help us shed more information around what his life might have actually been like. For example, one of the things he did is I think one of the stories centers around the fact that he's a shipbuilder and he learned the craft of shipbuilding from his father-in-law, and that's completely like we would never like hear that from history or whatever. But at the end of the day, he built like a big boat. And so it kind of makes sense that he would have learned the craft of shipbuilding from somebody close to him in order to,
Mm.
as part of his preparation, that God was preparing him to actually build this boat. So anyway, I always thought that that was kind of a neat thing, and I didn't know where that could sort of fit on the spectrum.
I'll kind of might as well it kind of skips around my points a little bit. That's totally fine. I'll kind of add to that where one of the reasons that I kind of have for um again fan fiction, what I kind of put in that category is to a large extent the Hobbit movies and also Rings of Power is not necessarily with them exactly, but one reason why you see yeah, fan fiction or adaptions that might add a bunch of stuff to content or change some things, but mostly adding to is because there's a lack of content to begin with. So, for instance, let's say, like in this case, Noah, we basically, we know what the Bible says about Noah. And then we can kind of fit in the puzzle pieces of what probably happened, what probably didn't happen. But for instance, learning from his father in law how to build a ship. We don't know exactly if that's true or not, but this is how this person depicts it. It's because he doesn't have there's a lack of content that he has to go by. So he has to fill in the gaps. So if you're trying to adapt a story, let's say you read a book and you love a side character in the book, and you're like, "Oh man, I really want to adapt this side character, like, and just make a whole story about him." If you only have what the book says, you're going to have to fill in some content that's missing there on your own. So that's kind of where that middle ground is, where you kind of want to stay true to form on things, but you're also going to take some liberties as well because you kind of need to in instances like that.
Yeah. Hey, just a sec. My internet is not as connected as it should be
Yep,
for
you're good.
some reason.
You were blurry, but you're pretty clear right now.
Yeah, well, part of it was I had our old episode uploading, which like our the previous episode, I had it uploaded
Gotcha.
in Descript, which it should not have been doing. Well, I mean, it was doing it because I told it to do it, but I shouldn't have told it to do it, so it was my fault.
No, you're good.
But beyond that, I'm looking and I'm connected to the Wi-Fi right now. I am I am not connected to the Ethernet, and I don't know why.
Sure.
Because I've got
Da- Dang kids.
well,
Messing around with them cool.
I mean, it's weird because I'm looking at everything and it should be all plugged in here, unless for some reason it's unplugged out there. Give me just a sec. Let me go look at that. I'll be right back. And if not, then it'll be fine. We'll just
Yeah.
continue on Wi-Fi. But
No, you're good. Obi-Wan, but once again.
strange. I might lose connection. We'll try something real quick.
You connected to it?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, hang on. Let me get my. Okay, say words.
Words.
Okay, have words. There we go. Yeah, so now I had to restart my computer.
Really?
Yeah, weird. Soup's weird. But I had to restart my computer, and that now appears to be working. Just a sec. Sorry about that, man. I just
You're good.
happened. Figured I would try to fix it if I could. All right, so get my bearings again here. Okay. All right. This is looking good. Okay. All right. All right. All right. So we're better now. Okay. So you had just finished talking about
Uh, that a lot of times adaptions can change based because there's like a lack of content to go by, and so they add.
Gotcha. Okay. So okay, what would be a good place to pick up? So from there,
Wherever you want to take it, my good sir.
we just dive into the next method.
Basically, I
Maybe?
won't be talking about this hardly at all. It'll just be this one now.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
I can keep on going, or you can take it away.
How about you just keep on going? I
I'll
like
keep on
that.
going.
And then
All right.
Yeah.
You can edit it out. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then the other, I guess, kind of the first one I was going to talk about, the true to form way of adapting. Now this is what I prefer. I think probably most people prefer, especially if you're fans of the original work. Like for example, so true to form, I put down Dune and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I will give an example of, I guess, what like an example of a movie that was not true to form, even though it's some people's favorite movie who didn't read the book. It's my least favorite movie. So the fourth Harry Potter movie. Um,
Okay.
People love that movie, and it is a good movie, but um for some reason that one, it's probably my least favorite movie because it takes away so much out of the books. Not necessarily changing stuff, although some stuff is different too, but a lot of stuff is just taken out simply because of time for the movie. They could have easily made 2 movies out of it. And um, so yeah, it just kind of irks me. So I would say that people who are very familiar with a writer's work, a content creator's work, very much prefer the true to form way, which is what I prefer as well. And again, I listed Dune. I think Dune even more so. Maybe I don't know Dune as much as Lord of the Rings, but Dune when I watched the movie just amplify just really captured what the book was. And even though it changed some stuff, one kind of random thing, but another couple things, really for the most part, it stayed true to form. And it was really enjoyable because of that. And I think people who had never read the books, you had never read the book before. I think you thought it
Yeah.
was a great movie.
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, I thought it was
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of an area where, but even the true to form ones though, stray from the path, I guess is the way to put it. Um, and so even in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, just a lot of changes that are in it too. For whatever reason, sometimes I don't see a reason for it. Other times there are reasons for it. And even in Dune. So even those true to form ones, I'm trying to really think of an example. Dune's kind of the best one that I think of. I'm sure there's other movies out there that might be better where it is a perfect adaptation of what has happened. And I don't think you can one either find it or if you can, man, they must be very few and far between. But that's kind of
Mm.
my 2 examples. It's kind of a
Yeah.
quick overview, and I could be wrong on all this. Is just my opinion, of course. But just kind of the 3 main ones. You kind of have the true to form. You have the fan fiction category that I put it in, where you call back a lot to the original, the original work of art, but also play around a lot of it, take liberty. And then you have your third category, which really even shouldn't be a category, just loosely based on an idea from someone's work or a story that happened.
Yeah, and so I guess it's probably fair to say that because there's a lot of passion around this, right? There's
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, like I think it's fair to say that people are going to get the most up in arms around that first one, right? True to form. It's kind
Mhm.
of like they're less forgiving. Okay, when you're going into it with the expectation of a true to form sort of, style, then there seems to be very little forgiveness from purists.
Yeah.
When it doesn't match right up or it doesn't, it's like, and I know we're going to get more into Rings of Power um next time. Rings of Power is not really an adaptation so much as it is an extension of the story, but
Mhm.
it's definitely falling under fire because because allegedly it's not holding true to the quality standard of Tolkien, and it's again allegedly missing some important you know keys of the story. And for me, I'm just like, you know it's probably an unfair standard to hold any writer to Tolkien number one, right? So it just
Yeah, very
okay,
true. Yeah.
right? It's probably an unfair standard. It's like, is it really going to be like? Can you possibly expect it to be that good? That's not fair. Um, to be one of the greatest literary artists of all time. I mean, it's like, okay, your screenwriters for Amazon probably aren't that good. Um, we know it. We know the space guys at Amazon build uglier rockets than Elon,
Mhm.
and so I have no problem believing that the overzealous bookstore of the internet doesn't have the writing quality that Tolkien does.
Yep.
Um, and yet I think it's pretty good. Um, and I think when you get into actual adaptation territory as well, see, this is something that I don't know if it's adaptation or adaptation. I guess both work.
We'll do
I know
both.
for me, I have not historically been much of a reader, which at least, especially not a fiction reader, right? That's still kind of pretty new for me. So I've always been the hey, just let me watch the movie, kind of
Right.
guy. And so for me, it's never really bothered me. I'm like, what are people getting all up in arms about? Um, and but the others are a lot more forgiving, right? So when you're in the world of fan fiction or just historical fiction or something, or like the loosely based, like you said, um, I don't think anybody holds these high expectations for those
Yeah.
as they do with the true to form. So if you're gonna try to do the true to form thing, um, then I guess be ready to meet some criticism, and I hope you got some thick skin, because it's like, man, especially when you got people who are passionate. I mean, I know people who are up in arms about the new Dune movie because they thought the 1980s Dune movie or whatever it
No.
was better.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? You're probably just an old freaking curmudgeon, because that Dune movie was freaking, like, as a
It
movie
was so good.
on its own,
Yep.
was fantastic. I mean, from the soundtrack to the
Yep.
actors to the everything, I thought was just fantastic. And so it's like, I'm sorry if it didn't live up to the standard of your 1980s flick, Bob, but it was pretty darn good. Um, in my very humble and completely correct
Yeah. It
opinion.
was very good. I need to read the book again and watch the movie right after just to get more knowledgeable with that, because there's a lot of stuff in there. He packs
Yeah,
a lot into it.
and let me say another thing too. I'm a little opinionated on this stuff. You know, uh, it in one sense it's kind of crazy that there's nothing new under the sun. Like, I I I honestly can't believe that my kids right now are into some of the very same things that I was into when I was a kid.
Mm.
Like, my kids are digging shows like Pokemon, um, Power Rangers, the Kratts. Like, when I was a kid, Kratts Creatures was my jam. Like, Zubumafu was a little after my time. My wife
Yeah.
liked Zubumafu, but a lot of people don't know that Zubumafu was a little bit more popular version of a show called Kratts Creatures. It's the first one that Chris and Martin Kratt did, where they went around and chilled with all these animals all across the world and everything. Well, now they've got a more animated version of the show, but it's the same two guys called
Mhm.
the Krat, Wild Kratts. And so my son Jackson, he loves them. He just calls them the Krat brothers. I'm like, they are into the same things that I was in. And then I think of things like movies, movies like me and my wife were talking about The Parent Trap the other day. There was that
Mhm.
90s one that I saw with Lindsay Lohan. Well, that's just a remake of
Right.
whatever, a 1950s one or whatever. And so there's a couple different rabbit trails that you could go down here. One of those is certainly that, well, the writer of the Bible had it right. Solomon, there's just nothing new under the sun, right? Things repeat themselves. In story terms, like, you guys know this, there's only a few, main variations of
Mhm.
stories that you're going to have. The names will change, the situations will change, but the stories, for the most part, are going to be similar. Um, I think that I if anything, I err more on the side of appreciation for people who are willing to take stories that people have loved for a long time and bring them to newer and more modern audiences. So, for example, I thought the 90s Parent Trap movie with Lindsay Lohan was a fantastic movie. Whether it still is, I don't know. Like, if I watched it
Don't watch it again. Don't watch it
with a
again.
critical eye, maybe I shouldn't watch it again. But growing up, it was one of those movies that I watched all the time, right?
Me too.
It's one of my favorites, right? But, like, no way would I have watched like the 1950s one, that it was, the original one.
Exactly.
Like, no way would I have watched that, right? But that story, which I thought was cool, was told to me in a way that I related with. So, if anything, I'm erring on the side of appreciation when I not frustration when I see remakes happen, because I'm now, like, this is kind of crazy, but I am now officially old enough that, like, remakes are starting to happen,
Yeah.
right, in my
Yeah,
lifetime.
dear. Yep.
Like I'm looking at that movie and I'm like, that movie is not old. What you talking about? Like, that's not an old movie. But, like, no, it legit is, right? And so, like, they're actually, and I had an example, but now I can't remember it. But there's a couple like this already that it's like, like, whatever, Lion King. I mean, even the Lion King, it's like, okay, well, now we're making it into, a version that is more like suitable for a modern audience, better graphical stuff and whatever. And it's like these classic stories, I think, do need to be reintroduced. And if I can just say to kind of wrap up this thought, I know we're going to talk a lot more about this next time, but the Rings of Power specifically, I I actually have deep appreciation for it because is it whatever? Is it like perfect Tolkien or whatever? Well, like probably not. No, but it's introducing a world to a potentially brand new audience. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers, but I heard something like over 25 million people. Like I heard like this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, television shows of all time. Like we already know it's the most expensive and the biggest production television show of all time. We know that. But I'm saying that like I think we have data that says that this is the highest, like the most watched
Mhm.
premiere or whatever of all time of a show. And I don't know whether or not that's true, so don't quote me. But like that's pretty impressive. And it means a lot of people who were not beforehand like introduced to the world of the Lord of the Rings, to Tolkien's world, a lot of new people are coming to that. And I think that's kind of cool. So I think that's a brave thing that they did. Whether or not it's perfect, that's less of my concern. I'm just concerned that somebody cares about getting the story out there and wants to do a pretty good job. So I think the whole mindset around adaptation is a good thing.
Yeah, I do think it is good that we're talking about it because again, just depending on the medium, it's hard to fit every single thing in something unless like you're given the opportunity or even just like the bandwidth, shall we say, to do it. So for instance, I think probably the most acceptable form of deviating from the original content is just totally taking something out because that way you're not adding to it or changing it. So for instance, in the Fellowship of the Ring, there's no Tom Bombadil in the movie. There's no Barrow Whites in the movie. They just took out
Yeah,
a whole section of that. And I think a lot of even like purists are okay with that because you're not changing the story. You just didn't have the time to do it. But in any situation though, you're gonna have these changes that happen. Um, but yeah, I was going on a line there. I think I forgot where I was going with that. But yeah, we'll get into it more next week with the Rings of Power. But I think it'll be a really fun conversation because you've never really been into Lord of the Rings. And now you're going through the books and you watch the first
yeah,
movie. And
yeah.
of
It's fun.
course, me, I I wouldn't say I am a tokenist scholar of the highest order, but I definitely know my fair share of Cimmerillion lore and very much lean towards that side.
Yeah.
And so like for instance, it would be my preference to actually see like a Cimmerillion movie made in a like dramatized like documentary. I think that would be amazing if they could
Oh
do
yeah.
that. So that's what I would love. But so I think next week will be a really fun conversation just going over the Rings of Power and what we think so far. And with this in mind too about what this specific I think you were right on that. It's part adaptation and then part extension of the world. I think that was a good way that you framed that. So that'll be really fun to dig into.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be cool. I guess one thing, because I'm the marketing guy, and so somebody expects me to, I guess, come up with something useful from my marketing slash business perspective on this. I'll just take a second to say that there is a way of adapting stories in your marketing, in your business, in your life as you're thinking about it. And when I say marketing, remember, we're all in the business of marketing. You don't have to have a business or whatever. Like you are in the business of marketing yourself. If at any point in time you want somebody to care about you or what you have to say, which is pretty much every human being alive, we're all in the marketing business. And so this just kind of goes to being a more interesting person all around. I would say that a lot of us have things that happen to us that like they don't really seem like that important or that big of a deal or the kind of things that people would care about. Um, but if told the right way and used at the right time, these things can definitely matter.
Mm.
Um, so for example, like we talked last week, my story the week last week was about how my thumb got jacked up. Um, that's it's something that happened. It's not a great thing, right? As I record this now, since this is literally an hour after just telling that story, because we kind of sometimes record podcasts back to back. Don't tell anybody. My thumb is obviously not better yet. So I'm still, it's obviously still big time on my mind. A couple months down the road, it's going to hopefully be something that is not, not top of mind for me. But I'm already starting to think of, well, how does this little thing that happened fit within the larger story of my life? What lesson is there to learn? And what I'm going to do, frankly, is as I'm creating content, this is just going to be in my drawer. It's a thing that happened that most people would never think to bring up unless they had to. But I'm trying to think of, well, how can I use that to give my attractive character in the world uh, something dynamic? And so as I create content, I'm going to be thinking about this, and I'm going to be thinking about, well, how does it fit within the larger context of who I am, how it's shaping me, how I'm thinking about things. For example, I already know that it's going to have something to do with patience, because I truly believe, no, really, it is funny, but I truly believe, I meant what I said. I'm right now, it's so funny that all this stuff is happening. I'm kind of again, I've had a pretty good life, but these last couple of weeks have been kind of rough. I'm not gonna lie. And at the same time, I'm reading through the book of Job, which, if you know anything about the book of Job in the Bible, it is all about suffering and about waiting on God and about patience and about trusting God even when it's hard. Tonight, our lesson at small group at church was patience, out of the book of James, talking about patience and waiting on the Lord. And it's so I really believe I'm being taught something about patience throughout this time. And believe it or not, I don't know how it's going to shape up or whatever, but I have plans to, at some point, use this story as an important talking point. Maybe it could be in a sales pitch, or it could just be, I don't know, maybe somehow I get a platform. A ministry pod, I'm going to record a podcast for my ministry podcast, the Bible Nerd podcast, about patience, and I'll use the story. So what I'm saying is, you can actually adapt something that happens, a regular old story from your life, or a mundane thing from your past, to a particular audience that you're trying to reach, or for a particular situation that you're trying to get at. And it's for me in business, I've talked about it many times on this podcast already, but my pastor porn story, it's my go-to story. The thing that happened, built a website for a pastor, it gets redirected to a porn site. And it's well, that was a sucky situation, but I cannot tell you how many subscription web design packages that story has sold for me over the years. And so what you do is you pick out the details that are the most relevant for the situation, cut off the stuff, the story of my thumb being, messed up that I told last time. By the time I tell that story 20 times, it's going to sound a lot different. It's going to, and then from that point on, it's going to sound the same every time. It'll be more concise, and the point will be more, I'm going to find a point to make from that story that sounds nothing like the rambling I'm doing now, and actually use it for a purpose. And that's what I'm getting at. Okay. So even adapting stories from your own life in order to fit particular situations in your life, I think are important. A lot of times people don't care about the boring details. They care about the important points. So the more you create content, the more you talk to people, and the more you mold the stories of your past and think about how they can be used for you in the future, the better.
Awesome. Good stuff. Yeah. I never really, adapting it more like, it's a adaptation in a different way, where you're kind of trying to take your environment and what's around you and push it to benefit you. It's a interesting way to look at it.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's look at the Bible in Romans 15:4. It says, these things that were written aforetime were written for our learning. And what the point there is, that the written aforetime, this is a passage from the New Testament, it's referring to the Old Testament. And the point is that, ultimately, the reason why the stories of Abraham and Job and Noah and Daniel and Samuel and all these other people are in there, they're written for our learning. They're written for us to be able to learn from. And the same is true of just your personal life. I mean, I truly believe that you go, there's a saying, you grow through what you go through. I fully believe that. If I didn't believe that, it would make life kind of miserable. And so this is not really a marketing point I'm making. This is sort of just a life point, but it applies to marketing. And that is just always be looking for the lesson And sometimes it's not going to be readily apparent. Like right now, I know the lesson is probably something to do with patience, but I don't know exactly what it is. But I'm looking for it. And it's going to hit me at some point. And when it does, that's when all the pieces are going to fall into place. But you can learn from your past, and you can even take those things and tell the stories in such a way that it benefits you in the future. So I do think it's something that we should be actively looking for, especially if we're trying to influence other people and
Yeah.
become a more dynamic person. So
That's a really great way to sum it up. Become a more dynamic person and influence people. Yeah.
yeah,
Good stuff, Stephen. Thank you.
sweet. Yes, you're welcome, Alexander. Is that your full name, or is it just
The
Alex?
first name's John Alex Giguere.
John Al. Yeah, John.
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
so yeah. So is it? But is it? It's just John Alex. It's not John Alexander.
Nope. John Alex Giguere, and my first name is spelled without an H. It's pretty simple until you get to the last name.
Interesting. So you're one of those weirdos who was like, you were named the nickname.
Yes.
Like my name is not Steve, right? It's Steven. But I'm Steve.
That's how I know you. Just Steve doing Steve things.
That shirt, by the way, it's a
That
fantastic
sounds
shirt.
great.
It's a fantastic shirt. I've had plenty of shirts over these years, and it's really one of the best fantastic shirts I've ever had.
Excellent.
Well, we're really off the rails now. Stories of the week, shall we?
It is also past 1 a.m. and nothing good happens past 1.
This is true. This is
All
true.
right.
Okay.
Story of the week.
Go for it.
ahead. I'll go ahead first. I know really nothing about this except I saw the trailer, and then our friend, who is the associate pastor at our church, now he's out training in Flower Mounds, Texas. Is it Flower Mound? Flower Mound?
That sounds right. I think that's correct.
Anywho, he said that this was he read the book that this movie is based off of. Speaking of adaptation, so it's called All Quiet on the Western Front.
Okay.
And it's a World War I movie coming out on Netflix in I think a month or two. And I really like kind of like gritty movies that kind of get down to the realism of things. And this movie,
Yeah.
I guess the book is known for being like it's not following real people, but it's following like basically based on stories of what actually happened during World War One. And so that's what this movie is. And I think that it's supposed to be like very a hard read by how brutal it gets. I think the movie is supposed to follow pretty closely in line with the book's contents. And so looking forward to that. I think it should be really good. Anyway, yeah, so it's called All Quiet on the Western Front.
100%. Cool. Very good. Be looking forward to that. All right. So my story of the week is a YouTube channel. Well, it's the Wired YouTube channel, so they do a ton of stuff on there. But one of the series that they do, I've come across it for different things, and it's so cool. It's called 5 Levels, and basically, what you you ever seen this?
I don't think so. No, I don't think I have.
So it's so cool. So what you have is in these different areas, these different fields, these different subject matters, you have a subject matter expert who explains the concept.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
yeah,
I do. Yep.
To 5 levels of people, going from basically a child to one of their equals, right? And it's interesting because they have to explain the same thing, but they have to put it in a way that is understandable to each of those different age groups and levels of knowledge. And so I've seen 2 of them so far. I'm interested to see what other ones there are. The 2 I've seen so far are black holes. That was neat.
Yeah, I brought that one. That was a good one.
Okay. And then there was one on I forget the exact subject matter, but it was related to playing the piano by Jacob Collier. Jacob Collier is a fantastic Grammy winning musician. He's like in his early 20s, I think. The dude's nuts though. He's like, he like corrects, like I'm not kidding. He corrects like the actual scale, like the actual scale of music is like off on a couple cents by one thing, and he like points that out. It's the craziest thing. Anyway, I don't even know how that's possible. How you correct music, but he can literally correct music. It's insanity. And he's right. So anyway, it's just nuts. So but it's cool
Hmm.
because it's kind of like I don't know. It seems to me like there's some real story parallel here. It's like because when you start out, it's like you when the people start out with the lowest, like the child, they're having to do a lot of explaining and like getting feedback from the child to make sure they understand along the way. But when it gets to the subject matter expert who's an equal with them, it's sort of like just a flowing conversation, and they're like,
Yeah.
the concepts are way more advanced, and they're just talking about like if anything, the future of whatever the thing is, not just trying to explain the basics of it. So
And
I
you get
thought that
to
was
where you get
really
lost, like at one level you start to get a little bit overwhelmed by.
yeah, that's right. And if I could just, I guess, implore you to take a lesson from that in marketing, a lot of times, and just in life in general, really, what you're doing is you're communicating. It's called the curse of knowledge. You know things, and because you know them, you assume other people know them as well.
Mm.
And so we often if we know something at a level 10, we tend to communicate it at a level 6, and the people that we're usually trying to communicate to, or in my world it would be sell to, but really communicate or sell to, are at like a level 2.
Mm.
So we need to talk to them 8 levels down, and really we're only going about 4 levels down. So you'd be surprised how much more detail and context you often have to give for people to understand what you're really trying to say. So a lot of my writing these days for the blog, for my business blog, is stuff that it's like really basic and simple sounding to me, but it's what my audience
Mm.
needs to know. It's what people searching for information needs to know. And so the more you can simplify things, I guess the better is sort of a lesson to take away from it, but also just to always remember your audience, whoever you're talking to. Your audience doesn't have necessarily the level of knowledge that you do. So it's good to adapt for your audience. So I think it's maybe another example of adapting a story. So
I think I think it would be really cool to see, maybe there's videos out there already like this, but see like a 5 level thing, a page that's all dedicated to like apologetics, like somehow, or like
oh yeah.
topics like anything. Like just so even a topic like justification or sanctification or just any number of things, and going through that would
Yeah,
be
dude.
really cool to watch.
Oh, that's a sweet idea. I
Maybe
like
I
that a
shouldn't have said
lot.
that out loud.
Oh, I'm writing down the podcast now. So no,
Yeah.
that's legit. That is awesome. Sweet.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining us again. And we're seeing some pretty good numbers on YouTube and spot on all our podcasting platforms. And so really appreciate everyone watching and being fans, if you can call yourself that, but just following us along and enjoying
Yeah.
Story World with us.
Yeah, it's super fun, man. This has been just an awesome, a real pleasure. And just share it. Yeah, share it with your friends, tell others. Let's get more people listening. Build up this community. All right.
See you next time.